It was a Tuesday. Not a dramatic day, no sirens in the distance, no sudden phone call, no breaking news alert. Just rain tapping the kitchen window, the kind of soft, gray drizzle Portland knows well in April. Steam curled off a mug that had long gone cold. The person sitting at the table hadn't moved in nearly 20 minutes. Not because they were thinking deeply, not because they were tired, but because moving felt like lifting something heavy, something invisible but real off their chest. And they just didn't have the strength. She'd been a doctor for 23 years. Emergency medicine. The kind of work where seconds matter, where you learn to read a face before the chart, where you can tell by the way someone walks through the ER doors whether they're in pain, panic, or both. She could stabilize a trauma patient while simultaneously calming a sobbing relative and directing 2 nurses with her eyes alone. In the department, people didn't call her by her title much. They just said, ask her, because when things got messy, and they always did, she was the one who brought order back. But somewhere in the last 2 years, the order inside her had started to fray. At first, it was small things. Forgetting to eat lunch, not because she was busy, though she always was, but because the idea of chewing, of tasting, of sitting still for 5 minutes felt like too much effort. Then came the nights. Not insomnia, the kind where your mind races. No, this was different. She'd lie perfectly still, eyes closed, body exhausted, but her nerves. They hummed, like a fridge left running in an empty house. A low, constant buzz under the skin. She started noticing it in her hands. Not shaking, not exactly. Just unsteady. When she reached for a pen, her fingers would hover a second too long. Once, while writing a prescription, she had to steady her wrist with her other hand just to keep the letters from blurring. She blamed it on caffeine, then on age, then on the new electronic charting system. Anything but the thing whispering underneath, "You're not okay," her daughter 16. Trapede quiet was the first to say it out loud. Not with anger, not even with concern. Just a simple question, tossed over breakfast one Saturday while scrolling on her phone. "Mom, when was the last time you laughed and meant it?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her toast. The truth was, she couldn't remember. Work got harder, not the medical part. Diagnoses still clicked, procedures still flowed, but the people, part the listening, the reassuring, the holding space for fear while staying calm yourself, that began to feel like walking uphill in deep sand. She caught herself cutting conversation short, smiling without moving her eyes, nodding while already planning the next task in her head. And once, just once, she walked out of a family consult room, turned the corner, and pressed her forehead against the cool cinder block wall for a full minute, breathing through her teeth, willing the tightness in her chest to loosen. A nurse passed by, glanced, then kept walking. Not out of indifference, because they all knew that look. They'd all worn it. Then came the headache. Not the usual tension, not behind the eyes. This one started behind her left ear, sharp and insistent, and spread like ink in water into her jaw, up her temple, down her neck. She took to ibuprofen, then 2 more. Then sat in her car in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes after her shift. Engine off, forehead resting on the steering wheel, waiting for it to pass. It did. The next morning she called in sick. First time in 7 years? At the clinic, they ran tests, blood work, EKG, basic neuroscreen. Everything came back technically normal. 152/94. Elevated, the nurse said gently, glancing at the chart. Consistently high on your last 3 visits. They did a cortisol test, sleeve of samples collected at 4 different times over 2 days. When the results came back, the doctor didn't say burnout, didn't need to. He just slid a printout across the desk, a graph with a jagged red line, spiking wildly, never dipping into the restful zone it should at night. Your body, he said, is stuck in alarm mode. Like a car with the gas pedal pressed down, even when it's parked. She nodded. She knew what that felt like. He suggested a few things. A low-dose beta blocker for the blood pressure. A referral to a therapist's good one, covered by insurance. And then, almost as an afterthought, he added, Have you tried anything? Non-medical? Something just for you? Not for your patients. Not for your family. For the person who shows up at 6 a.m., already braced for the day. She almost laughed. Non-medical? For me? Her idea of self-care was reusing a coffee pod because she'd forgotten to buy more. I walk, she offered weakly. Do you? He asked, not unkindly. Or do you walk while checking messages, replaying that difficult case, planning dinner? She didn't answer. He handed her a small pamphlet. Mind-body strategies for health professionals. Inside, breathing exercises, mindfulness apps, nature immersion. She tucked it into her bag. She meant to look at it. She really did. But real life kept happening. A burst pipe in the basement, a parent-teacher conference, a cousin's wedding she couldn't miss. The pamphlet stayed folded, buried under receipts and a crumpled grocery list. Then, on a Sunday afternoon when the rain had finally stopped and a weak sun was trying to break through, she drove out to the edge of town, to the old house, the one she hadn't been inside since her father passed to winters back. The executor had handled the sale, but some things, personal things, had been left for the family. Boxers labeled in neat block letters, tools, books, papers, attic, miscellaneous. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Just sorting, clearing, maybe finding a photo she could frame for her daughter. Something to say, this is where part of you comes from. The attic smelled of cedar and dust and old paper. Sunlight slanted through the single dormer window, catching motes in the air. She pulled down a medium-sized box lighter, then expected and pried open the flaps. Inside. Records, vinyl. Dozens of them. Not random. Carefully sleeved, alphabetized by composer Tchaikovsky, Schubert, Holst, Copland, and on top, smaller cardboard box, slightly worn at the corners. Taped shut. She peeled back the brittle tape, gave way with a soft rear up hand, lifted the lid. Inside, 50 record sleeves. Not new, not pristine, loved. Edges softened by handling. Spines marked with tiny pencil ticks. And on the front of the box, in her father's unmistakable handwriting, the same one that had signed birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on the fridge, was a title, 50. Timeless classical works for stress. Relief. She sat back on her heels, surprised. Her father was an engineer, civil, practical. He built bridges, literally. Concrete, steel, load calculations. He kept a pocket watch that ticked like a metronome. He believed in blueprints and margins of safety and double-checking every figure. Music, sure, he'd hum while fixing the garbage disposal. He'd tap his foot during the 1812 overture on the 4th of July, but classical. For stress relief? Curious, she lifted the first sleeve. Samuel Barber. Adagio for strings. She turned it over. On the back, in that same careful script, a date, June 12, 2003, and below it, a single line, after the board meeting Adagio saved me. She blinked. 2003. The year his biggest project, the East Side Overpass, had nearly collapsed during a stress test. The year he'd come home 3 nights in a row without speaking, just sitting in his armchair, staring at his hands. She remembered bringing him tea. He'd taken it, murmured thanks, but his eyes stayed distant. She'd thought he was angry, or ashamed. She never knew he'd been listening to music, or that it had helped. She pulled out another batch. Goldberg Variations. Date, November 4th, 2005. Note: after Mom's diagnosis, needed order. Found it here. Her mother. Alzheimer's. The slow fade. The year everything got quiet in the house. A third. Vaughan Williams. The Lark Ascending. January 18th, 2008. First morning without her. The lark still rose. She swallowed. Hard. Downstairs in the living room sat an old turntable, the kind with the heavy wood base and the needle that needed careful handling. Her father had kept it long after CDs took over. Digital's efficient, he'd said once. But vinyl. It breathes. She carried the box down, her arms full. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light as she set it on the coffee table. The turntable was covered in a cloth. She brushed it off, plugged it in. The motor whirred to life with a familiar, comforting hum. She chose the first one, Barber, Adagio, for strings. She placed the record on the platter, lowered the tone arm with the care she used when inserting an age 4 slow, steady, no sudden moves. The needle touched down with a soft hiss, then a crackle, and then dash silence. No, not silence. Space. A deep, open space, and then the strings entered. Low, slow, aching, but not broken. Like grief that knows it won't last forever. It didn't surge. It didn't demand. It just was. A long, slow exhale in musical form. She stood by the window, arms crossed, expecting to hear it politely. Maybe nod, think, Dad liked this, and move on. But 30 seconds in, her shoulders dropped. Not because she told them to. They just let go, like ropes untying. 1 minute and her breath deepened. Not a conscious choice. Her body starved for oxygen. She hadn't realized she was holding back. Finally drew in a full lungful. 2 minutes she didn't notice the tear. Not at first. It just traced a warm path down her cheek. Then another. Not sobbing. Not gasping. Just a quiet, steady release, like pressure easing from a valve, long stuck shut. She didn't move. Didn't wipe them away. She just stood there, listening as the music rose not in volume, but in presence, swelling with a sorrow so vast it held room for everything. The exhaustion, the fear, the guilt of not being enough, the grief for time lost, the love she kept buried so it wouldn't get in the way of doing her job. All of it held without judgment. And then the turn. Not happiness, not yet, but relief. A shift. Like clouds parting just enough to let a single shaft of light through. The music didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the headache or lower her blood pressure in that moment. What it did was something quieter, deeper. It witnessed her. It said, yes, this is heavy. You're allowed to feel it. The final notes faded into the room's natural quiet, the tick of the hallway clock, the distant call of a crow, the soft sigh of the house settling. The automatic stop lifted the needle. The platter slowed to a stop. She stood there for a long time. Then slowly, she walked to the kitchen sink, ran cold water, splashed her face, looked at herself in the small mirror above the faucet. Eyes red-rimmed, yes, but clearer, less. Clenched, she went back to the living room, took the Barber record out, slipped it back in its sleeve. Then, instead of putting the box away, she left it open on the coffee table. That night, for the first time in months, she didn't lie awake listening to the hum in her nerves. She fell asleep to the memory of strings rising, falling, holding space, and the strange, tender realization that her father, the man of blueprints and safety margins, had known something she'd forgotten. Sometimes the strongest thing you can build is a moment of quiet. And sometimes the most practical tool isn't a stethoscope or a scalpel. It's a record player. And the courage to sit still long enough to let the music in. She didn't know it yet, but 50 pieces lay ahead. 50 chances to remember how to breathe. 50 reminders that healing doesn't always come in pills or procedures. Sometimes it arrives on a needle in a groove, in the space between one note and the next, and sometimes it starts with a rainy Tuesday, a dusty box, and the simple, radical act of pressing play. She didn't plan it. Not really. She just didn't put the box away. It sat on the coffee table, open like an invitation or maybe a dare. The next evening, after helping her daughter with a history project and washing a sink full of dishes without once checking her phone, she found herself standing in front of it again. Not out of duty. Not out of hope even. Just curiosity. What would happen if she did it again? Would it feel like the first time? Or would it be just music pretty, but ordinary? She chose the second record, Bach's Goldberg Variations. Her father's note. After Mom's diagnosis, needed order. Found it here? She lowered the needle. This time, she sat. On the floor, actually back against the sofa, knees drawn up, mug of chamomile, a new habit. Bought on impulse at the grocery store in her hands. Batch wasn't like Barber. No sweeping sorrow. No cinematic swell. Just patterns. Clear, precise, interlocking lines like gears turning in perfect sync. A melody here, a counterpoint there, a bass line steady as a heartbeat. It wasn't emotional. Not at first. It was logical, calm, reassuring in the way a well-drawn blueprint is reassuring. You could trust it. Halfway through, she noticed something. Her fingers, wrapped around the mug, weren't gripping anymore. They were just holding. And her breathing, she was actually aware of it. Not because it hurt. Not because it was shallow. But because it was there, steady and easy, matching the pulse of the music. In 2, 3, 4. Out 2, 3, 4. When it ended, she sat for a full minute, eyes closed, listening to the silence the music had left behind. It felt different this time. Not empty, clean. That's when she got the journal, not a fancy one. Just a blank notebook from the back of a kitchen drawer. Thick paper, no lines. She flipped to the first page, wrote the date. Then, under it, batch. Goldberg felt. Like my thoughts slowed down enough to catch one. No analysis. No medical terms. Just what was true. The next night for Pavin? Her father's note? Jan, 2007. After the layoff notices went out. Needed grace. This one was different again. Gentle, flowing, like walking through a garden at dusk. It didn't fix anything. But for those 20 minutes, the weight on her chest felt distributed, not gone. Just shared by the music, by the memory of her father sitting in this same room, hearing this same piece. Feeling some version of the same thing, she began timing it. Exactly 20 minutes. No more, no less. Enough to settle, not enough to drift into sleep or distraction. She turned off her phone, not just silenced. Off. Placed it face down in the drawer of the side table. The first few nights, she'd twitch, phantom vibrate, convinced she'd missed an alert. But the world didn't end. The hospital didn't call. Her daughter didn't need rescuing. The quiet held by day 7. Something shifted. She was sitting in traffic, a usual nightmare near the bridge end, instead of clenching the wheel. Jaw tight, mind already rehearsing the first patient's chart. She caught herself, listening. Not to the honking or the radio static. To her own breath, in, out, steady, and for a fleeting second. She heard it, the echo of Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23, the one she'd played the night before. The way the piano and strings wove around each other, light and playful, like sunlight on water. She didn't smile. But her shoulders, those stubborn, knot-tied shoulders, dropped a fraction. Just enough to notice. That night, she wrote, Mozart. Felt like remembering how to be light, even for a little while. Day 14, Debussy. Clair de Lune. Moonlight. And this time, she wasn't alone. She'd just lowered the needle when her daughter appeared in the doorway. Hoodie pulled up, phone in hand but not scrolling. Just standing there watching. She didn't say anything. Didn't ask. Just walked in, sank onto the sofa, curled her legs under her, and rested her head against the armrest, eyes closed. The music rose soft, shimmering like light on a still pond. And for the first time in over a year, her daughter didn't pull away when she reached over and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Afterward, the girl didn't open her eyes right away, just murmured, "That was nice." Like a blanket for your brain. She didn't ask to do it again. But the next night, she was there before the record even spun. Day 22, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. First movement, slow, haunting, built on repetition 3 notes. Over and over, like a question asked again and again. Waiting for an answer, halfway through, she realized something. She hadn't taken her anxiety pill that morning, not because she'd forgotten. She had remembered. Stood in the bathroom, bottle in hand, cap off, and paused. Her hand hadn't shaken. Her chest hadn't tightened. The usual morning dread, the one that used to sit like a stone behind her ribs, was quieter, muffled, like someone had turned down the volume on an old familiar alarm. She put the cap back on, left the bottle on the sink. That night, in the journal, Beethoven. No pill today. Not because I'm better, but because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't need it to get through the door. She started paying attention not just to how she felt during the music, but after. The walk to the car, the drive to work, the first patient handoff. Little things. Making eye contact a second longer. Saying, "Tell me more," instead of "What's the main issue?" Letting a silence sit in a conversation without rushing to fill it. One afternoon, a colleague, a seasoned nurse with 25 years and a dry wit, leaned against the counter in the medroom and said, "You seem different lately, less like you're bracing for impact." She almost brushed it off. The old habit, "I'm fine. Just busy." But this time, she paused. "I've been listening to music," she said simply. "Old stuff. My dad's records." The nurse didn't laugh. Didn't roll her eyes. Just nodded slow. "My brother, he's a pilot. After 9/11s, he couldn't sleep. Woke up every night at 3:15, heart racing. Started listening to, I don't know, some English choir thing. Every night. Same time, same piece. Said it was like resetting the system." She smiled faintly. Funny, sometimes the oldest tools are the ones that still fit. It stuck with her. Resetting the system. Not fixing. Not erasing. Just clearing the static. A week later, she ran into a friend, a neurologist who'd heard she was doing something with music. "Over coffee?" she asked tentatively. "Is there any science behind this? Or is it just nice?" Her friend didn't dismiss it. Instead, she pulled out her phone not to scroll, but to show a diagram. A brain scan. 2 images side by side. 1. A person under stress, red hot spots flaring in the amygdala, the brain's alarm center firing non-stop. The other, the same person, listening to slow-tempo classical music. The red dimmed. Cooler blues and greens spread through the prefrontal cortex, the part that thinks, plans, soothes. "This," her friend said, tapping the screen, "is your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest switch finally getting a turn. Music like this, especially pieces with a steady slow pulse around 60 beats per minute tit, can actually entrain your heart rate, your breathing, your brainwaves. It's not magic. It's biology." She stared at the image. So it wasn't just her. It wasn't weakness or imagination. Her body was responding. Her father hadn't been sentimental. He'd been practical, using the tools he had, notes on a page, vibrations in the air, to regulate a system that had gone into overdrive. That night, she didn't just play the next record, DVOKS American Quartet, third movement. She read about it first. Learned it was written in Iowa in 1893, while the composer was homesick for Bohemia. Missing his family, overwhelmed by a new country and a demanding job. And yet, listen, there's warmth in it. Nostalgia, yes, but also joy. A sense of belonging being built, not just remembered. Her father's note, July 19th, 2010. After the move, felt lost. This reminded me, home isn't just a place. It's a feeling you carry. She played it twice, by record 28. Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a theme by Thomas Talashe started seeing the pattern. It wasn't random. Her father hadn't just thrown 50 favorites in a box. He'd ordered them, like steps on a path. Start with Catharsis Barber. Let the grief out. Then Grounding Batch. Rebuild structure. Then Grace 4. Then Lightness. Then Reflection Beethoven. Then Hope Devoe K. And now this Talus. Soaring, spacious, almost sacred. Not religious exactly, but reverent. A sense of something larger holding you. She flipped through the journal. 28 entries. Some were just a word, calm, clear, held. Others were longer, a memory triggered. A small victory made it through a shift without snapping at anyone. A realization I laughed today. At something silly, and it didn't feel like a betrayal. One night, she played Elgar's Nimrod Record 31. A piece about friendship, resilience, quiet strength. Her father's note, October 3rd, 2014, after the surgery. Weak. This reminded me, not alone. She thought of her team, the nurses who brought her coffee without asking. The tech who always double-checked her orders when she looked tired. The security guard who remembered her daughter's name. She'd always seen them as parts of the machine. But they were people, carrying their own weights. And maybe, just maybe, some of them needed a reset too. The idea came slowly, gently, not as a project, not as a solution, just a maybe. What if? Just for 5 minutes. The staff lounge had music. Not piped-in pop or the drone of a muted news channel. But something like this. Something that gave space instead of filling it. She mentioned it to the charge. Nurse, a no-nonsense woman who'd survived 3 hospital mergers and still remembered every patient's name. 5 minutes, she said, eyebrows up. Between traumas? You think people will sit still for that? No, she admitted. But what if they just stood, or sipped coffee, or stared out the window? What if it wasn't about doing anything? Just pausing. The nurse studied her, then nodded. Try it. Next Tuesday. Staff meeting day. They'll be half awake anyway. Worst case, someone complains. Best case? She shrugged. We get 5 minutes of peace. For seasons, autumn. Lively, but not frantic. Celebratory, but not loud. A harvest. A gathering. A moment of abundance before the cold. That Tuesday at 2:05 p.m. As the last person grabbed coffee and settled into plastic chairs, she walked to the small Bluetooth speaker in the corner usually used for paging or birthday songs and pressed play. No announcement. No explanation. Just the first bright notes of the violin, like sunshine on fallen leaves. People looked up. Some smiled. Some kept sipping. One older paramedic closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall. When it ended exactly 5 minutes, the silence wasn't awkward. It was soft. Someone sighed, not in frustration. In release, the charge nurse caught her eye and gave a small, slow nod. Afterward, the paramedic lingered. That Vivaldi, he said, voice low. My wife used to play that on the piano. Before the kids. Before. Everything got loud. He paused. I haven't thought about that in years. He didn't ask for a copy. Didn't ask for more. He just said, thanks, and walked back to his rig. But the next day, he was waiting by the lounge door. You got that recording? He asked. The Vivaldi. She did. Sent it to him. And that night, before bed, she added a new line to her journal, not about how she felt, but about what she'd seen. Music doesn't just heal the listener. Sometimes it gives others permission to remember they're still human. The experiment continued. Tuesdays, 5 minutes. Always a different piece. Always chosen for a reason. Greg's morning mood on a foggy shift starts Sadie's gymnopody. No one. After a tough code, Tchaikovsky's Andante cantabile, on a quiet afternoon no one was forced to stay. But fewer people left. One afternoon, a young nurse knew, wide-eyed, still flinching at every overhead page, sat in the back, arms wrapped around herself. They played for S. Sicilian Gentel, rocking like a lullaby for grown-ups. Halfway through, the nurse rested her forehead on her arms. When it ended, she wiped her eyes quickly, stood, and walked out, but not to the bathroom. To the supply closet. To reset. Later, she stopped her in the hall. That piece, the nurse said, voice barely above a whisper. It felt like someone finally turned the volume down on everything. She didn't offer advice. Didn't say it gets easier. She just nodded. It's on Spotify. Search for Sicilian, piano, and cello. Third result. The nurse smiled, small, real. Thank you. That night, in the journal, she wrote something new. Maybe the real work isn't just listening. It's passing the needle to someone else. She still had 22 records to go. But for the first time, the path ahead didn't feel like a countdown. It felt like an offering. And somewhere, in the quiet after the music faded, she could almost hear her father's voice, not in words, but in the space between the notes. Keep going. The best parts are still to come. It started small. So small, most people wouldn't have noticed. A coffee cup left on the counter in the staff lounge, still half full. Long. After the break was over, a nurse sitting with her eyes closed, not napping, just still. A paramedic humming a few bars of something unfamiliar while restocking gauze. A security guard who usually patrolled with his radio crackling standing by the window one afternoon. Watching the rain, shoulders relaxed, for nearly 3 full minutes, no one announced it. No memo went out. But people began to linger in the lounge a little longer on Tuesdays. Not to chat. Not to scroll. Just to be there. Before the 5 minutes began, and sometimes, for a minute or two after, like stepping out of a warm room into cool air and letting your body adjust. Then came the day they played Knoxville, summer of 1915. Samuel Barber again, but this time, with voice. A soprano singing words by James Odge. We are talking. On the porch. Soft, intimate. Like someone whispering a memory you almost forgot you had. It wasn't scheduled. She'd brought it in on a whim, thinking maybe it was too long, too personal, too much. But that morning had been hard. A young man, not much older than her daughter, brought in after a crash. Stable, thank goodness, but the fear in his mother's eyes. The way she kept smoothing his blanket like it could hold him together. It had settled deep in her chest, heavy and familiar. So at 2:05, instead of Vivaldi or Satie, she pressed play on Knoxville. The room quieted faster than usual. People looked up, not startled but drawn in. The words weren't dramatic. Just a child's memory of a summer evening. Fireflies, parents talking. The sound of a streetcar in the distance. The feeling of being safe, loved, known. And the grown-ups sit talking gently. Halfway through, the older nurse, the one who'd lost her husband, Winter's back reached up and brushed her cheek with the back of her hand, not hiding it, not apologizing, just letting it be. And the woman beside her, without a word, slid a tissue across the table, not with pity. With recognition, when it ended, no one moved. No one clapped. No one spoke. The silence wasn't empty, was full, like the room itself was holding its breath, honoring what had just passed through it. Then the charge nurse stood, stretched, and said, simple as could be, well, that was something, and walked out, but not to the desk. She went straight to the chapel down the hall, a place she hadn't stepped into in years. Afterward, 3 people asked for the name of the piece. Not to download it. Not for a playlist. Just to know. To hold the title like a small stone in their pocket. That's when she understood. This wasn't just about stress relief anymore. It was about connection. About remembering when the job asked you to be strong, efficient, unshakable, that you were also soft, tender, human, and that it was okay, more than okay, to let that part breathe. Even for 5 minutes the next week, she didn't just play music. She added one sentence before it started. Standing by the speaker, voice low, calm. Today's piece is by Ralph Vaughan Williams. It's called The Lark Ascending. He wrote it after coming back from the war. It's not about forgetting the hard things. It's about noticing right in the middle of them that something beautiful is still rising. No sermon. No instruction. Just context. A little doorway into the music. People started showing up early, bringing their own mugs, sitting in the same chairs like it was a ritual they hadn't known they needed. One afternoon, a young resident quiet, always double-checking himself. Eyes shadowed with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't wash off and the shower stayed behind after the 5 minutes. He didn't ask for advice, didn't vent, just stood by the speaker and said, "My grandfather used to play violin." He'd play this one piece. I can't remember the name, but it felt like this. He gestured at the air, still humming with the last notes of a Chopin nocturne, like everything was going to be okay, even if it wasn't yet. She didn't offer solutions, didn't tell him to take time off or talk to someone. She just said, "Would you like to hear it again?" He nodded. She replayed the last 2 minutes. He closed his eyes. And for those 120 seconds, he wasn't a doctor carrying the weight of life and death calls. He was just a young man remembering his grandfather's hands on the strings. That night, in her journal, she wrote, "We don't need to fix each other. Sometimes we just need to sit in the same quiet. Word spread not through emails or meetings, but the old-fashioned way." A comment in the elevator. A note slipped under a door. Heard about the music break. Mind if I sit in? A physical therapist started bringing her therapy dog a calm, old golden retriever named Gisand. People would sit on the floor during the music, resting a hand on his warm flank, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, matching it to the tempo of a Bach aria or a Debussy prelude. Gus didn't need training for this. He just knew. Slow breathing. Soft warmth, presence. He was better at this than any. App. Then came the day the hospital's wellness coordinator, a thoughtful woman who usually ran yoga classes, nobody, attended and handed out stress balls that ended up in drawers, asked if she'd be willing to talk about what was happening in the lounge, not as a formal program, not as a therapy intervention, just share what was working. See if it could grow. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep it small, sacred, safe. The moment you called it a program, it risked becoming a checkbox, something else on the to-do list. But then she remembered the nurse crying silently to Knoxville, the resident with his grandfather's memory, the paramedic who now played Sadie in his rig before every shift. This wasn't hers to hoard, so she said yes. They called it the 50 Project, not because it was official, but because people kept asking, is this part of that 50 thing? And it stuck. They started with volunteers. 10 people. First responders, nurses, social workers, anyone who wanted to try 15 minutes. Twice a week in a quiet room down the hall from radiology. No phones, no charts. Just chairs, soft lighting, and music always chosen with care. Always with a one-sentence introduction. This is by Arvo Pint. It's called Spiegel. Im. Spiegel mirror in the mirror. It's built on just 2 notes, repeating. It's for when your thoughts won't stop racing. Let the music be the mirror. You don't have to hold anything up to it. Just let it reflect what's already there. They added breathing knot, guided meditation, nothing fancy. Just breathe in for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. Synced to the music's pulse. The first session, 8 people showed up. By the third, it was 12. They didn't talk afterward. Not required. But sometimes, as they stood to leave, someone would say, "That Grieg piece. It reminded me of fishing with my dad." Someone else would nod and say, "Yeah, the quiet kind of fishing." And that was enough. Then came the journalist. Not from a big national outlet. A local writer, someone who did human interest pieces for the city paper. Her sister was a nurse in the ER. She'd heard about the music breaks. She asked if she could sit in. Just observe. No interviews. No quotes, unless offered. She came on a Thursday. They played Nimrod, again the Elgar piece about friendship and endurance. Afterward, the writer sat for a long time, staring at her notebook. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright. "I've written about burnout for 10 years, she said quietly. Policy changes, staffing ratios, mental health days, all important. But I've never seen anything like this. It's not about fixing the system. It's about tending to the people in it while they're still standing." Her piece came out 2 weeks later. Not a splashy headline. Just a quiet photo sunlight through the lounge window. Circle of empty chairs. A single coffee mug on the table and a title that made people stop scrolling. 5 minutes that hold you. It didn't go viral, but it landed. Emails came in from other hospitals, a fire department, a school district, A group of librarians. Not asking for a manual. Just, how did you start? Can we try something like this? And then the request that surprised her most. A group of hospital chaplains asked if they could join a session. Not to lead. Not to pray, just to be there. To witness. One of them, a soft-spoken man who'd buried more people than he could count, said afterward, "We're trained to hold space for grief. But no one teaches us how to hold space for peace. This is sacred work." She hadn't thought of it that way. But when he said it, she knew it was true. There was no altar, no ritual. Just people, tired and tender, choosing again and again to sit down, turn off the noise, and listen. To music, to each other, to the quiet hum of their own humanity, still there beneath the fatigue. One afternoon they played The Swan by St. Saëns. Cello and piano, graceful, unhurried, deep. As the last note faded, a nurse who rarely spoke raised her hand. "I used to dance," she said. "Ballet. Before the kids, before life." She smiled, small but real. "I haven't felt my body move like that in 20 years. But just now, I swear, I felt my spine lengthen, like it remembered." No one offered to start a dance class. No one said you should get back into it. They just let the moment sit, honored it that night. Her daughter, who'd been coming to the living room sessions regularly, said something that stayed with her. "You know, it's not really about the music, is it?" She looked up from her journal. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the music's beautiful. But people aren't crying because of the notes. They're crying because someone finally gave them permission to stop holding it all." She closed the journal. Her daughter was right. The music wasn't the healer. It was the invitation, the safe space, the signal that said, it's okay to lower your guard, just for a little while. You're among people who know what it costs to keep it up. A week later, the wellness coordinator handed her a folder. Preliminary date not from surveys, but from HR. Sick days down. Retention up in high turnover units. One unit reported a 40% drop in near-miss medication errors over 3 months. Correlation, not causation, the report said carefully. But the trend was there. She didn't celebrate. Not yet. But she let herself feel a flicker of something hope, maybe, or just quiet satisfaction. Her father's old box, with its 50 records and 50 handwritten notes, had become more than a personal comfort. It had become a bridge, and bridges, after all, were her father's life's work. She went home that evening, not tired in the old way, the bone-deep, soul-sore kind, just used, like a well-loved book. Worn, but still holding its story, she played record number 38, Gustav Holst's Venus, the bringer of peace. Soft horns, harp, a melody that floats like mist over water. As it played, she didn't write in the journal right away. She just sat, listened, let the music settle into her ribs, her shoulders, the base of her skull, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't think about what came next. She just let herself be here. Now, in the gentle light of the room, with the turntable spinning slowly, and the quiet certainty that whatever came tomorrow, she wouldn't face it alone. Because somewhere, in a dozen different places, at a kitchen table, in a rig, in a quiet hospital room, other people were doing the same thing, lowering the needle, taking a breath, letting the music remind them, you are still here. And that is enough.